This is a story of who we were, how we got here.
Houston, the Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility.
And where we are going.
You've got mail.
So join us as we take history off the page.
Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Jason Hansen, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, History Off the Page. I'm a professor of European history at Furman University, and I decided to create this podcast to make knowledge about history more available for people on the go. Because let's be honest, we live in a world where people just don't read as much as they used to. Many of us just don't have the time, and others have grown up in a digital world where reading books just isn't the way that we consume information anymore. So whatever your reason is, this podcast will provide you with a series of lectures on historical topics that help explain the modern world, who we are, and most importantly, how we got here. Which brings me to a second key point. Why this podcast? There are so many history-related podcasts out there these days. What makes this one any different? There's quite a few answers that I could give you, but the most important is that this podcast focuses not on what's happened in the past, but it's about uncovering how and why those things have happened. This podcast will get at some of the big issues. How did leaders like Hitler, Napoleon, or Stalin become masters of power? Why did others such as Louis XVI or Mikhail Gorbachev fail so spectacularly? What enabled something as terrible as the Holocaust to take place? Not just the dry mechanics of it, but how is it that ordinary men could come to shoot unarmed women and children? This is one of the greatest questions of the 20th century. How do you shoot women and children? But we're also going to go beyond this obsession with politics and economics that usually dominates historical study. We're going to get into issues of culture and society as well. What was it like to live in London in the 1840s? If you went back in time and you walked into a bar, what would be the one safe thing that you could order to drink? How do fish sticks help explain the failure of communism? And why are Vincent van Gogh's paintings so special? So as you go through this podcast, you'll see that this isn't the typical dry history class filled with names and dates, things that you had to memorize and maybe even put you to sleep that you had to deal with in high school. Incidentally, I have to say, whenever I think of how history should not be taught, I think of that classic scene from the 1985 movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where you've got the comedian Ben Stein, and he's playing this kind of history professor, and he's going on about the Great Depression and tariff policy.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government.
So as all that's going on, the students are falling asleep, they're staring off into space, one of them's even drooling. That's not what good history is supposed to be about. So in addition to being informative, this podcast should be fun. It's told in an informal and playful manner with lots of references to contemporary culture, things like Star Wars, Monty Python, movies, etc. Okay, a brief word about the format of the podcast. Basically, it's set up as a kind of virtual textbook, organized into a series of lectures, with each covering specific topics, such as how Hitler built a dictatorship, what made Darwinism so controversial, I'll give you a little hint, it's not what you're probably thinking, or the consequences of World War I. There will be a basic tier of free episodes available through the website that will help you get a good idea of the major developments, concepts, and actors of the period in question. I've also set up a Patreon page for those of you who would like to support our show, and if you do so, you'll get access to an additional set of episodes on things such as urban planning, the history of terrorism, and the environmental movement. You can find listings of both sets of episodes on our website, www.historyoffthepage.com. Finally, we'll also have a presence on social media where you can find out more about future episodes, submit questions, and of course provide feedback about what you've already listened to. I'd love suggestions about topics you'd like to hear about in the future. Again, you can check out our website, www.historyoffthepage.com, or follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @HistoryOTP, or on Facebook, and eventually on Instagram as well. That's all for this brief intro. I hope you'll join us for a future episode as we begin to take history off the page.